Rory, we still can't see you.
Colleen, if you hit the record button yet.
And we are recording and you are live streaming. You're good to go.
Okay.
Rob for a second. All right, I think we're recording now, so we're good to go.
You are.
Well, looks like we have an interesting agenda tonight. I'm not going to say anything about how long it'll take us to get through it. Rob.
Don't jinx us.
I'm not going there either.
So if there's some things that you wanted to highlight for us in the work session here, that would be great, Rob.
Let me just pull up the agenda so I've got it in front of me. All right. So nothing on the licenses that's particularly noteworthy or controversial. So I think we're fine there. The public hearing to consider the proposed amendments to the Town Code Chapter 9 licenses. This is essentially, it's not even essentially. This is the temporary expansion of restaurants into parking lots. This mirrors what we've actually done under the executive order. So essentially this is, again, not essentially, this is a ratification of actions that the town has already taken. I don't really expect a whole lot of public comment during the public hearing, but there may be. If there is, I would note that under the executive order, the temporary permits will expire in October 15th. So none of this is undoable, and in fact automatically becomes undone on October 15th. We've had about 16, I say about because it's 15 or 16, about 16 restaurants that have taken us up on the temporary permit and are operating in parking lots or some other location outdoors at this point. So I think that whole thing is fairly self-explanatory. And as I say, I don't expect a lot of controversy or public comment on it, but it's possible. The communications, other than the consent agenda, Jeff Marchant has resigned from the Affordable Housing Collaborative. Jeff has been a just amazing guy to work with. He's been awesome. As you know, he retired a number of years ago, and this was one of the few things he was continuing to do. He's decided he wants to enjoy different things at this point. Narrow River Preservation Association's letter on the Fish and Wildlife Service's proposed hunting and fishing piece. We have submitted a letter the council received last week actually, a copy of the letter that the town sent under my signature. I've also responded with formal comments, essentially the letter reformatted as formal comments to the Federal Register, the notice of proposed rulemaking. It wasn't clear to me that everything that was going to the department or to the service via letter was going to make its way into the official public record on the proposed rule. So we put on a pair of suspenders and augmented the belt by sending comments into the Federal Register as well. We're very consistent with what the Narrow River Preservation Association put out there. We did not speak specifically to fishing. The notice to, or the proposal to expand fishing didn't seem to be of any major concern locally, and we didn't comment on it.
Can you call up that letter when we get to maybe
Sure.
that communication item, just to go over it?
Sure. Under new business. So the first piece of new business is the legislation, that we would send to the state legislature asking for authority to put a bond question on the ballot in November, asking the taxpayers if they'd like to issue bonds and incur $6.5 million worth of debt for the purpose of doing projects on the municipal side. The projects that we've identified in the capital improvement plan and on numerous occasions over the course of the last 6 months include a public radio infrastructure improvement, a construction of a wall that would protect Matunic Beach Road, road repairs generally, improvements to the facilities at Old Mountain Field, and the construction of a new boat dock or the repair of the existing boat launch at Marina Park. There was also $360,000 proposed for bicycle and pedestrian improvements, essentially signage and striping the crosswalks and this sort of work. So that's just a resolution. The council is free to do what it would like with that. The state legislature has said that they want to deal with these municipal bond questions. It's not clear what the time schedule is at this point. At least I'm not clear on what the time schedule is at this point. If anyone else has information on it, you're ahead of where I am right now on that.
Rob, can I ask you a question regarding that?
Sure thing.
I know you talked about the radio project, but when I read the language, it's kind of broad, but I'm assuming that's on purpose.
It is broad. This legislative language was written by Karen Grandy, who is our bond counsel. She didn't identify the radio project. She didn't call it out as an individual project, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be eligible for financing under this language. What's more, the resolution is as she presented it. If the council has questions, what I would suggest the council would want to do here is, if you pass this resolution, an amendment authorizing the manager to check the language with bond counsel before submitting it to the legislature would be appropriate. So she's drafted it, but I'd give it one more chance. I'd give us one more chance to check with her and make sure she's really comfortable with the fact that she didn't call out the specific projects.
Yeah, I think with the radio project, because of its significant value, I think it would be important to include something referencing that in that language.
Well, again, it's a legal question for bond counsel. She didn't seem to, we told her what we were trying to do here. So she didn't seem to be worried about it. But again, if it gives everybody comfort and she doesn't mind putting it in, I'd be happy to have her do that.
Thank you.
Abatements, $347 worth of abatements. This is just, cleaning things that have come in late. This next one, a resolution authorizing the town clerk to advertise for order, advertise an order of public notice. This is the East Matunic Farm development. When this project got underway, the town had agreed to accept the roads when that subdivision was completed. The subdivision is now complete. So we will be accepting the roads, and there will have to be stop signs put on these intersections identified here in the resolution. In order to put stop signs in, we have to amend the ordinance that lists all of the places in town where we have stop signs. So this is happening concurrently with the acceptance of roads.
Rob, Joe Veely, can I ask for clarification?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, a notice of advertisement
Okay.
is put on the consent agenda, but I think this is the third meeting where some are and some aren't. So I wonder what makes them fall on or off the consent agenda. I mean, typically a notice of advertisement is on the consent agenda, has been. This one is off, and I think last meeting we had one off in the meeting before.
Right. This one I can't speak to. Susan, have you got rationale or reasoning here?
You had said that when we were doing orders of notice on an ordinance that you wanted to have them not on the consent agenda, so this would be considered the first reading.
Okay.
So for instance, the CDBG order of notice, that's not an ordinance, that is on the consent agenda.
So Joe, I think the answer to the question is that, and I do recall the conversation I had with Susan a while back. This is essentially a way of avoiding. It's not going to solve the problem entirely, but it does give us one more sort of safeguard against what happened with the unruly gatherings ordinance.
Okay, yep. All right, thank you for that clarification.
That being said, I mean, Joe and the rest of the council, if you feel like, I think there are ordinances that are formalities, almost like adding a stop sign here or there. If we wanted to add that to the consent agenda, I think that that's fine too. I don't know. I mean, it takes almost as much time to do that as to bring it up and pass it too, so.
Yeah.
And if the council's not comfortable with our doing this on a regular basis, I'm happy to change it. We did, when we walked away from the unruly gathering conversation, we did try to figure out, what can we do to make sure the public has more notice, the public, doesn't feel like they're being surprised. And this was one simple thing. Rather than putting it on the consent, we just pulled it off so that there is actually some discussion about it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. I think, more opportunity is better. So I'm good with it. Thanks.
Septic discharge. That memorandum is somewhat self-explanatory. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or have John answer them. And the wastewater fees. Road materials. Again, the memorandums are there. Happy to have John talk about where we are with oil prices down. Concrete should be, bituminous concrete should be relatively inexpensive this year. And John, if you want to tell us exactly where we are in terms of.
Sure. So typically, the oil emulsion product comes out of either Venezuela or Spain, and that actually lags fuel pricing by about 6 months. We have seen a little drop as far as that commodity goes. We're hoping for a bigger drop when it comes time to do the road reconstruction and paving project, capital project for this year. So I'm hoping to get something to the council. We've talked to our contractor, Miozy. They've agreed to hold their price. We've had very good luck with them in the past. So I'm hoping to get something to the council probably in the month of July for them, and we'll have a better idea what asphalt pricing will be at that point for that's our big lion's share of expenses, that capital improvement program. Silver Lake Pump Station, any questions or are any of John's? This is sort of the John Shock end of year agenda here. If there are any questions on any of the DPS pieces, probably good to take them all at once. Otherwise, with regard to Kingston Cleaners, the police department had a disruption in services recently that had gotten them to think about going out to bid. They did go out to bid, and they have a memorandum that recommends that we go with Kingston Cleaners. The cost is slightly, and I mean very, very slightly higher for Kingston Cleaners than the other bidder. However, the disruption of service that the department had recently was with the other bidder,
and they have confidence that Kingston Cleaners, who has been providing service in the interim, is capable of meeting the demands of the department better than the other bidder. So they've deemed Kingston to be the best qualified and most likely to perform the two bidders.
Now, Rob, that's Kingston Cleaners and not Pier Cleaners, right?
Kingston Cleaners, I am certain that address 50 High Street.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't look at the address, but because the only reason I asked, I know Pier was doing some of the work for them when the other place wasn't operating.
Right. This is a business name. I don't know the relationship between Kingston Cleaners and Pier Cleaners, except that they share a mailing address, or a physical address, which suggests they are the same principal, if not interrelated companies.
Rob, if I may, I can clarify that for Bryant.
Thank you.
I think Kingston Cleaners was bought out by Pier Cleaners several years ago. So Kingston and Pier are the same company. So the other thing I wanted to say was, excuse me, the disruption in the laundry in March for a couple of weeks. It came up abruptly, and we had no one to turn to. Larry Fish at Pier Cleaners or Kingston Cleaners graciously came forward and handled our cleaning for 2 weeks. And then the East Winds abruptly went out of, laid off all the people. So, of course, we were in the middle of COVID and we had uniforms that weren't cleaned. So we didn't want to take that risk again for a couple of $100. Although East Winds has been a great company, I can't say anything bad about them. They had to close down because they had to lay off their personnel. So anyway, long story short, we can't afford to have our EMS and our police officers without clean uniforms if this happens again. Kingston Cleaners showed that they could stay open during the crisis where East Winds had to close down. So that's my recommendation. Safety mostly, more so than the minor difference in the cost.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Continuing down the agenda, temperature controls, HVAC service and maintenance for all municipal buildings, starting July 1st. This is a contract that went out to bid, and the evaluation is in the memorandum that has gone to the council and each of to all of the places where we post this document. So that's out there. If there are any questions about that contract, we'd be happy to answer those. Resolution authorizing an award of bid to Otis Elevator. Again, this is for all of the elevators in our inventory. The memorandum's out there and outlines who the bidders were and outlines the criteria that were used in the selection. O is the resolution extending the town's declaration of emergency adopted at session on March 15th. We would extend this out to the March 15th. We would extend this out to the 13th of July. This puts us essentially in the same place as the state and would allow us to update and modify executive orders as necessary, as well as to enforce the currently in place local executive orders. Those executive orders still speak to things like the number of people who are gathering in public places, gives us a mechanism for enforcing that. We still have restrictions. The state still has restrictions on people coming into Rhode Island from out of the country, or people coming into Rhode Island from places where they are under a stay-at-home order. That's not supposed to be happening. And this is just, again, a way for us to remain parallel with the state emergency declaration and to have local mirrors to the executive orders that are appropriate for us to mirror locally. One of the ones, as just by way of sort of example, that we have locally that does not exist in the state is an executive order that allows for local businesses that have not been able to get paper bags to use plastic bags without fear of enforcement for violation of the local ban on plastic bags. It's little things, but it's things that do make a difference. And if we didn't have the emergency declaration, we would not be in a position where we could mirror what the state was doing on a local level and do things such as the paper bag replacement, temporary replacement of paper bags, which is a way of providing some relief to local businesses that are already under an awful lot of stress. I'd be happy to talk about the need for an emergency order extension. At some point, this begins to feel a little overrun, but I'm not sure we're there yet. I don't think that we've sort of exhausted the need for the flexibility that the declaration provides. Amy Goins is here tonight. Mike is not. Amy, is there any other thoughts on the declaration extension that you would share with the council?
I think we should, this is Amy Goins, Assistant Town Solicitor. I think the town's declaration of emergency should remain in place as long as the state's declaration of emergency remains in place.
So, Rob, in terms of that, the governor obviously hasn't laid out any timetable for the complete, dismissal of the executive or the, emergency declaration. But I assume that we're going to have social distancing in some form or another for a long time until there's some type of cure. So does that mean we're expecting that to last that long, or is it at some point, is there some other policy-making body that starts to say that there are these rules for, social distancing, or is it always just going to be?
Right. So you're right. This is beginning to feel a little peculiar. It's not the sort of shock to the system or jolting event that, we are dealing with anymore. We're now dealing with a consistent, persistent problem as opposed to something that requires immediate and extraordinary action. So yes, it's beginning to feel a little bit less like an emergency declaration kind of event to me than it is an event that needs to be addressed through new rules, through a new set of procedures that are promulgated by the state legislature, by the town council, et cetera. Which is part of the reason why locally what we've been doing is when we have an executive order that really requires it, we're having the council ratify it as we are tonight on the agenda. Because it is important that we not completely abandon our democratic, and Republican forms of government here. We have to do something to make sure that the system adjusts to the new conditions. My real fear about where we are in this pandemic is that we're not going to have, I think we're starting to see that we're getting the benefit of one of the characteristics of this family of viruses. Coronaviruses don't seem to do well in summer conditions. Now, that may be because of just climactic changes in that affect the virus. It may also be human behavioral changes that happen in the summer. People spend more time outside, they spend less time in the office, they have the windows open. There's a bunch of things that humans do that change the immediate indoor environment. They make it less prevalent in the indoor environment because people spend less time there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we are going to see that in the summer, the virus wanes. What I'm worried about in the long haul is, as we saw with the influenza in 1918, and as we see every year with the coronavirus flu, it recurs. It comes back, and we see it come back with a vengeance in the fall. So what I'm afraid of is having us get sort of numb to executive orders and emergency declaration kind of stuff, because I think there may come a time in the fall or early winter next year when we do need to take extraordinary executive action to deal with a new crisis, a true jolting event in the fall or winter of next year. I don't want to be in an environment where this just sort of drags along and we're always feeling like we're dealing with a crisis, but it never really feels like a crisis until it is in November or December, that kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, I think that extending the emergency declaration right now makes sense. It's where the state is. It's where a majority of the states are in the New England and New York, New Jersey region. It's where municipalities are in this region. It makes sense for us to stick with this strategy. But I do know that people are, not just here in South Kingstown, not just in Providence, not just in Boston, people are beginning to try to figure out what comes next, because this isn't, the natural disaster kind of emergency. This is a prolonged and persistent event, and we're going to have to figure out what's next. My hope would be that we figure out what's next for July, and that July, August, and September feel, we sort of regroup and have a way of having governance feel the way it should. And then if we have a shock again in the fall or winter, that we are able, we're agile enough, we haven't become, numb enough that we're not going to be able to react quickly, and that we're not gonna be stunned by it either.
We have managed to eat up most of this work session. Are there other questions for Rob before we get to the regular session? All right, very good. Thank you for recapping the agenda there. Made it all the way through this time. That was great. I guess we can take a brief 2-minute recess here if anybody wants to get water or something. That's what I'll do. All right, Susan or Colleen, could you start the recording, the meeting? Is Susan there?
You're all set.
Okay, very good. All right. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the South Kingstown Town Council. It is Monday, June 8th. The time is 7:30. Our first order of business is the pledge to the flag. Susan, if you would lead us in that, please do.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And our first order of business, of course, is take the roll call, please, Susan.
Council President Collins.
Here.
Council Vice President DeCruz.
Here.
Councilwoman Kelso,
Here.
Councilman McEntee,
Here.
Councilman Veely.
Here,
All members are present.
Very good. And of course, I'll just remind us all, and hopefully we can remember as much as possible, to identify ourselves when we're speaking, just so that the people who cannot see us on the call know who's speaking. All right, item 4A and B are the approval of minutes of previous meetings.
Rory McEntee, I'll make a motion to approve for A and B.
Brian DeCruz, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion from Rory, second by Bryant. Is there anyone opposed? All right, and that motion carries. Item 5 is the consent agenda.
This is Bryant. I'll make a motion to approve item number 5, the consent agenda.
Rory McEntee, I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion from Bryant, second from Rory. Is there anyone opposed? And that motion carries as well. And that brings us right up to item 7 on the agenda, which is the public hearing. This is a public hearing to consider proposed amendments to the Town Code, Chapter 9, Licenses and Miscellaneous Business Regulations, and Chapter 12, Offenses and Miscellaneous Provisions, and to the zoning ordinance, Article 9, Administration, Enforcement, and Relief relative to establishing temporary restaurant outdoor seating regulations and permitting process, as shown on Exhibit 1 of the agenda. And we did discuss this at some length when we talked about putting the order of notice in. But this, of course, will allow the public to have another chance to give some input in it on it. Are there any, Susan, anything that needs to be read into the record for this one? You're muted, Susan.
I don't believe so, but let me double check.
We have a record from the planning board, Amy.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yes, there is a memo from
There
Kayla Gray,
is.
Director of Planning, to Robert Zarnetsky, Town Manager, dated June 1st. It includes background on the proposed ordinance amendments, as well as findings of fact regarding consistency with the comprehensive plan and consistency with the purposes of zoning. So the council can adopt those findings.
Thank you. All right, now, Rob, do you want to just give a basic rundown? I know this has sort of been in place through executive order, but might as well go over it again.
So this is a policy actually that's been adopted widely across the state of Rhode Island. The idea is to ensure that restaurants that are limited in their seating capacity because of the current COVID crisis can expand their restaurant service out into, while the order doesn't direct it, out into adjacent spaces. The idea is to be able to move into the parking lot or a lawn or some other location that's convenient to the restaurant, so that seating can be had outdoors and people can be compliant with the state guidance with regard to seating at restaurants, which is 8 feet apart between the tables and no more than 5 people sitting at a table. It's hard to do inside. It's easier to do if you can set up facilities outside, if you can set up tables outside of the building. We've been doing that here in South Kingstown for 2 or 3 weeks now. We've had about 15 to 16 applicants who come in and been approved for temporary permits to expand their dining areas. And we haven't had any incidents yet. We haven't had any complaints yet. I will say that it's still early for some of the restaurants, are not all in full swing yet. But so far so good. The reports we're getting back from both customers and restaurant owners is that the use of outdoor spaces has been received well by the public and is proceeding without any major disruptions in neighborhoods or what have you. So with our short experience of 2 or 3 weeks, we can report that the program seems to be working well.
Deb, I see your hand is raised.
Does this ordinance keep pace with the governor's phases? Because phase 2, which we're in now, you can have 8 people at a table. and parties of 15 can reserve. They'll be seated at 2 separate tables. Does this keep pace with that?
Deb, this is Amy Goins, Assistant Town Solicitor. Yes, the ordinance references and incorporates the directives and guidelines and executive orders at the state level.
Thank you.
Joe?
Joe Veely. So just one comment and then a couple of observations. So initially, I thought that the executive order could have been a little less restrictive, although I'm happy that most of the applicants don't feel that way. So that could have been just me being a little brat, but the applicants seem to be happy with it. I'm thrilled that and thankful that we waived any fees that were involved. And it seems to be going smoothly, and the people who are taking advantage of it, the feedback I'm getting is they seem to be happy. So again, I think overall it's a good solution. Again, my initial, you all heard me, my initial concerns were that it was a little bit too restrictive, but the applicants seem to be happy with it. So thank you for your efforts on behalf of the staff.
Thank you for that. I will say that the staff has been wonderful, and I think that they have in fact added value. We've heard from restaurant owners who were looking at expensive modifications, construction. After talking to staff, have figured out ways to do it less expensively and are delighted with the fact that they haven't had to spend money.
Good. Any other comments from council members or questions? All right, seeing none, this is a public hearing, so I'm going to open it up for public comment. I will call on people in the order in which they raise their hands to be heard. If you are on your phone, you press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. With that being said, is there anyone who would like to make a comment on this ordinance? I'll just give folks about 30 seconds, so hopefully bear with the silence here. All right. Last chance.
This is Bryant. I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Deb Kelso, second that motion.
We have a motion by Bryant, second by Deb. Let's take the roll.
Council President Collins,
Aye.
Council Vice President DeCruz,
Aye.
Councilwoman Kelso,
Aye.
Councilman McEntee,
Aye.
Councilman Bailey.
Aye.
It is unanimously voted to close the public hearing.
This is Abel. Do I hear a motion on 7A?
Rory McEntee, I'll make a motion to approve 7A.
I'll second that, Debbie Kelso.
Motion by Rory, second by Deb. Any discussion?
And this is Amy Goins,
yeah.
Assistant Town Solicitor. Rory, can you amend your motion just to incorporate the findings of the planning board, please?
Rory McEntee, I will amend my original motion to include an incorporation of the findings and facts by the planning board.
I'll second that.
For that motion second, any discussion at this point? All right, let's take the roll for it as well.
Council President Collins,
Aye.
Council Vice President DeCruz,
Aye.
Councilwoman Kelso,
Aye.
Councilman McEntee,
Aye.
Councilman Veely,
Aye.
all approved unanimously.
Very good. And that brings us to item 8, which is communications. 8F is an email dated May 29th, 2020 from Jeffrey Marchant submitting his resignation from the Affordable Housing Collaborative Committee. We received that and placed it on file. What would we like to do with it now?
This is Deb Kelso. I'll make a motion that we accept Mr. Marchand's resignation and instruct the staff to send him a letter thanking him for his many years of service.
Joe Veely, second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. 8G is an email dated May 30th, 2020 from the Narrow River Preservation Association providing information on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's proposed hunting and fishing plan for the Chaffee National Wildlife Refuge and the extension of the public comment period to June 8th. And an email dated June 4th, 2020 from Kathleen Champagne expressing opposition to the plan. Received those and placed them on file. Are either of those folks on the phone or on the meeting would like to speak to it? Okay, seeing none. Rob, I know that you've drafted a letter and already submitted it on behalf of the town. If you wanted to just call that up on your screen and just sort of hit some of the main points that, you know.
Sure thing. So I'm going to share my screen now. This is Rob Zarnetsky. So we did submit both formal comments and sent a letter to the local field office here in Rhode Island. Our comments were built around three sort of areas of concern. The first are general policy objections. We noted in our letter that we believe that this part of the country is so densely populated that the small federal properties that are located here, the Fish and Wildlife Service properties that are located here in Rhode Island, in Eastern Massachusetts, Connecticut, Long Island in particular, are really being put to their best and highest use as it is. The recreational uses that get made of the Wildlife Service refuges in the densely populated part of the country are very different than the uses that are made of wide open, large, hundreds and thousands of acres of land in the Western properties in particular, but throughout the South, even up in Maine, the properties are just larger and hunting is a more appropriate use on some of those larger properties. We did note that we recognize that there is a need to manage wildlife even in Rhode Island and the properties that are smaller. These may be small properties, but they can become overrun by deer and coyote. And we definitely have seen large increases in the deer and coyote populations in this part of the country in the last 20 or 30 years. However, there are other ways to manage wildlife. You don't need to allow hunting in order to control the deer and the coyote populations. There are a number of contraception programs that have been studied for many years, both at the federal level and at universities around the country. Here in Southern New England, the University of Connecticut has a particularly aggressive research program around deer contraception. And there are ways to do hunting so that it's not 7 months out of the year allowed on these small properties, which is what the proposal is at the national level. We also went through and talked about the local conditions. One of the things that is most noticeable about both the Chaffee Preserve and the Truston Pond property is that they abut very densely populated residential neighborhoods. The neighborhood to the north of the Chaffee Stedman division is half-acre zoned properties, and there are a number of residential units that are well within the range of firearms shot from the center of the Stedman property. So there's real concern that the property just isn't large enough. I also noted that there were a number of state facilities, and those facilities are also gunshot sensitive, I would suggest. The fact that you've got family court going on and there are gunshots in the back room may be of some concern to the litigants and to the court officials trying to manage those proceedings. I noted to the federal agency, the Department of Interior, the Fish and Wildlife Service, that if this were a federal facility, if this was a federal courthouse, if this was a federal office building as opposed to a state office building, the U.S. Marshals and the Department of Homeland Security's Federal Protection Service would have been directed to conduct an evaluation of whether having hunting going on 865 feet away from the courthouse or the courthouse parking lot would have affected operations at the courthouse. To the best of my understanding, the federal government has not done that sort of evaluation for these state facilities. And then finally, we sort of rattled the sword a little bit on some legal issues around the use of these properties. The first is that the proposed site has suggested, or I'm sorry, the proposal has suggested that a parking lot be sited off of Crest Avenue. Crest Avenue is a private road, and it seems based on our records that Hillside, which is a public road, ends on the north side of Crest. And then you go 16 feet or 20 feet the width of Crest Avenue before you hit the federal property. So it looks like the federal property, if it does not have the right to access from Crest, may not be able to do that may not be able to construct a parking lot and have users go across that width, that short section of Crest, and get to the parking lot without acquiring that property right from the owners of that right. We are a licensee. I will note we have been granted a traditional use of that road, and we do have a stake in any litigation, potentially have any stake in any litigation that might happen around the rights to that 16-foot wide section of pavement. We currently have a license to use it for public purposes, and increasing traffic there could, in theory, affect our license and our ability to use it for the purposes that we've been allowed to use it from the owners or by the owners. And then finally, we just make note that while the federal government is free to make a decision to allow hunting, and that's really just a discretionary act. There's nothing anybody can do to say, you can't do it. If they do open a hunting ground on these properties and injury happens, they can, however, be sued. So we just want to alert the public and the federal government to the fact and let them know that we recognize that they are setting up a potentially dangerous condition, and they need to be very careful about how they proceed there. And finally, we just let them know that we do appreciate their interest in promoting use of the federal properties here in South Kingstown. We absolutely want to continue to see these properties thrive. These are properties that are cherished by people here in town and by people throughout Rhode Island who come down and go bird watching and walk the woods and walk the pond and you know, enjoy this as a wonderful place where wildlife still is protected. We think that that is a good use of public lands. And again, we encourage the public to use it. We just don't think that hunting is the way to increase public use. And in fact, earlier in our comments, we made note that we actually suspect that hunting will discourage public use of the property because joggers and walkers and bird watchers are not going to want to be in a place where there are hunters. And hunters aren't going to want to be in a place where they know that they potentially are going to have stray shot leave the hunting ground. So it's not a great place for hunters to want to go, and it's not a great place for those who aren't hunting to go if they think that hunters may be there. And that is what we've had to say.
All right, thank you, Rob. I think that's a pretty strong letter. I would, there's a few hours left of June 8th. So if there's folks watching and still interested in commenting on this proposal, they can do so through the Federal Register.
Yeah, the easiest, I'm sorry,
No, go on.
this is Rob Zarnetsky. The easiest way to find it is to simply type in Federal Register, Chaffee National Wildlife Refuge hunting, and the Federal Register page will come up.
All right, very good. Any further comments on this issue, council members? All right, do I hear a motion on 8G?
So it's Deb Kelso, maybe we're struggling with what the motion should be, Abel. So what?
I think I would entertain.
To thank the town manager for his efforts on behalf of the residents of the town and on behalf of the town council.
I think it's just a motion to place these on file is probably fine.
Well, I'd still like to thank the town manager for his efforts.
Well, yes, you can
I'll
do
make
that.
the motion to place it on file, but I'm going to add to thank the town manager for his efforts. I think it's a job well done.
Joe Veely, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. And that brings us to comments from interested citizens. A smaller group than normal, but if there is anyone who would like to speak on any topic in the town or nationwide or in the world, lots of stuff going on. You can raise your hands by using the raise hand button or by pressing *9 if you are on your phone. And if you do wish to speak, just state your name for the record, please. Is there anybody who would like to speak tonight? I see Christy Fish has her hand raised. I will unmute you now, Christy. Hopefully that works. You may need to no, you're good.
Hi, Abel. How are you? It's Christy Fish. Is this, I'm sorry, because I have been following, but now I'm a little bit confused. Is this community comment for everything on the table right now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm usually, it's not until like 10 o'clock, so I got a little confused. Good for you guys. So I think my question is probably for Rob, but it's regarding the referendum, because it's come about and I have a couple of questions that I'm hoping Rob can answer. If the referendum passes, Rob, will it negate the whole budget approval? And if so, will we go back to square one in the budgeting process?
So this is Rob Zarnetsky. Mr. President, I think we can answer that question if you'd like.
Yes.
So no, it doesn't negate the entire budget. What it does is it requires the council to go back and make adjustments to the budget as it was passed. So the budget referenda, two of them, deal with the funding for the schools, the PTT, the property tax transfer of $1.1 million. The first question would remove that PTT. The property tax transfer would be reduced by $1.1 million. That's all it would do. It wouldn't in any other way change the school's budget. It wouldn't in any way change the town's budget. The second question would reduce the town's operating budget, the expenditure side, and it's only the expenditure side, by $300,000. In the context of this year's budget, it wouldn't change the tax rate. In fact, we're contemplating certifying our tax roll on or about June 15th, which is our normal practice, because these two questions don't produce a result that would reduce taxes. What they do is they change the expenditure side on our side and the expenditure side on the school side potentially, but really it's only the expenditure side on the town side. It would say we can't send $1.1 million to the schools, and we can't spend another $300,000 on the town municipal programs. So in total, that's $1.4 million that we're being told to take off of the municipal side. Now, that doesn't mean that the schools will not have the money to run the program that they've proposed, because they've had savings of about $1.1 million, $1.09 million on their side because of transportation savings. So they will have money to run the program should they choose to do so this year. On the municipal side, the $300,000 would simply be money that we did not take from the undesignated fund. So we will not be changing the budget in any dramatic way. The tax rate will not change. The expenditures that are forced by it, should the referendum pass, will have to be identified by the council. But the proposal would be that we simply not spend money out of the undesignated fund for activities that we had proposed to spend money on. Does that make sense, Kristen? Is that helpful?
I think I may have to replay it again and make sure it's clear. So my second question, which you may have answered within that question, is again, if the referendum for the school side passes, the transportation savings that is now on the town side, does that automatically go over to the school side?
So the resolution that was passed by the school committee said that based on the budget passed by the town council, the school committee would transfer the savings from the transportation account or from the transportation contract. It was based on the budget that had been proposed and adopted by the town council. Sorry about the grandfather clock, guys. But since we wouldn't be dealing with the budget passed by the town council at that point, their resolution automatically would negate the transfer. And in fact, that's sort of what everyone's intention was that if they were going to have the savings, let them either spend their savings and don't give them a PPT, or give them the PTT, but take the savings back. That really was what the legislative history shows here. So no, if the budget referendum question passes and the PTT is reduced by $1 million, then they will not be down $2.2 million. They will be down that 1.1, and they will have their transportation savings.
Okay, so the school will retain that, in other words.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, those were my two main questions. So I appreciate the clarification, and thank you guys. Thanks for making community comment so early tonight.
Thank you, Christy.
Thanks, have a good night.
Is there anybody else from the public who would like to offer any comments? I don't.
Hey, Abel, this is Bryant. We didn't have any callers on the phone earlier, but now we do. So I don't know if they understand how to unmute or raise their hand.
Yes, good point, Bryant. It's Abel. If you are listening on your phone and you have called in to make a public comment, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone and then *6 to unmute yourself. I see a phone number calling in, and please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Deb Bergner, and I'm calling in. I think I'm able to speak now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I was watching the school committee meeting about 2 weeks ago, and then I watched the school building committee last week. And on multiple occasions, the visioning committee that was established by the superintendent and some school committee members was discussed. However, multiple times we were asked, the community has asked for who are the members of the visioning committee, and that was carefully avoided by the superintendent. She talked all around it, but never directly answered who was on the visioning committee for the school facility plan. Is it possible that you could help the public and request the members to be published? It's confusing to me why she would be evasive on who was chosen. I don't believe that community members even had awareness that this was happening. And so I'm concerned that when we're going to be looking at our facilities, that we have a cross section of the community available and participating as we have in the past. Do you think that you could help determine who the visioning committee is for the public, since it was asked on multiple occasions and she will not provide that to the public?
I think that that should be public knowledge, certainly. We'll see if we can find some way of getting that.
Well, it was asked, and it's very concerning to me that a brand new superintendent would create a committee that doesn't represent the community. And that while we heard what a visioning committee might do, we don't know who she chose with some school committee members to be on that committee. And so having participated in the facility plan in the past, it's concerning to me that now we have a very closed group and a very non-transparent process. And when we're asking at public meetings and we're not getting that information, I just don't know where to go next. So I'm coming to you, and I know it's not your purview, but it is a concern of multiple people in the community.
Oh, all right.
Do you think that you could get that? Do you think that you could get that quickly?
I wouldn't know how quickly we can get that information. And Rob, do you have a sense if you asked the superintendent about this?
I just sent Linda a text to ask her. I don't know why she hasn't been able to do that. I know she's busy. Beyond that, I have no idea.
No, well, if you watched the meeting, you were at the meeting, it was asked directly multiple times and not yet ever provided. So it's just concerning to me that a very simple list that she clearly knows who it is, why that's not available to the public. I'm just asking for help.
This is Brian. It looks like Rob messaged the superintendent, and we'll hopefully get some information.
Does it not concern you that you don't know who's on the visioning committee? It's not a concern? I don't know why that if it's not a big deal, then you could just roll out the names. And so it just seems like it's a secretive process. And where in the past there was hundreds of people in the high school cafeteria participating. I just don't know why we've gotten to this point, and how do we make people aware that it's happening, and open it up so it's clear to everyone what's happening. That's why I'm asking for your help.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate that. And I think if we're going to have further discussion on this item, we should make a motion to add it as a discussion item. In the meantime, if that's not forthcoming, then I would say, Rob has asked for the information from the superintendent. So if you follow up with him, hopefully he will get that from her in short order,
But it goes beyond just what my ask. The reason these one-off conversations with follow up and have your own conversation, it doesn't provide the information to the whole community, all 30,000 residents. And so I don't agree with the have a one-on-one. First of all, I think it's not an efficient use of our people's times if we have lots of one-offs, but I just would like that information made available to the public so that everyone who's interested has that information. Because it is a very high interest topic to the community. So
I-
that's why I don't want it to just be follow up and have an email from me to one person. I would like the community to be aware, because the community, I didn't ask on Wednesday. I was watching, but I didn't ask. Other people have asked. And it is a concern that the superintendent would avoid providing how those people were selected and who they are. Isn't it a concern that you don't know, that it was asked at the school building committee and members who sit on the town council still don't know? I mean, we count on you to advocate for the community and to ask, and when we're asking, to help us. That's all.
All right, Deb, I appreciate that. Some things like the creation of these committees is, as you said, the purview of the school committee and in tandem with the superintendent. I have not been following this issue particularly, but now that you raised it, I'm curious to see who's on it, and I would think that I'll probably find out around the same time that you do.
Well, it should be a representative committee of the community, not just hand-chosen people. It should be business owners. It should be people with kids of all ages in the schools, people who don't have kids, people who have yet to have kids, and who have raised kids, people who are business owners, just like it was in the past. And if that committee isn't representative of that, then we should have concerns, because we don't want a train tunneling down one track and not considering all options and all possibilities. So that's why I'm concerned that when we're asking at public meetings and not getting that information, it should be a concern to everyone in the community, because it's a simple question, right? It's not a difficult question. It's a black and white answer. Here's the list of people. And if you can't get that as a member of the community, it's befuddling. So I would appreciate all your help in doing this. I know it's a small, simple ask, but it's for everyone in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, if I may just quickly, one thing that I do think is worth the council's knowing is that, to the best of my understanding, this isn't an actual committee. This is a group of people that the superintendent has asked for advice from. It's not a formal committee, subcommittee of the school committee. It's not a, she's been drawing on, for example, Kayla Gray and the planning department attended 2 work sessions or 3 work sessions. She's had principals, she's had teachers. It's not a committee in the sense of a formal subcommittee created by the school committee for this purpose, is my understanding.
Rob, the only other thing I would add really quickly is that it's also not part of the school building committee either.
Okay, thank you for those clarifications. Deb, you had a question?
So I think we better add this as an agenda item, because I've just got a couple of things to say. Can I make a motion to add this as an agenda item, please?
I'll second that, Deb. Bryant.
So I was a member of this group.
We just passed the motion first. Sorry.
Okay.
Is there anybody opposed? All right, so go on.
No, so I was a member of this group. I was asked to join this group. It was 6 2-hour sessions over the course of 2 weeks. So it was a 12-hour investment. It was not a visioning committee that I think people are looking back to several years ago when the legacy plan was developed. It was not that. This was primarily, so there were 30 or so people, about 30, and 25 of those people were administrators and teachers. There were a couple of community members, myself, and maybe 3 or 4 of us that were not connected directly to the schools. This was not the legacy planning that people think it was. This was the superintendent asking for opinions, really, on protocols, on educational platforms, things that, quite frankly, I had to sit out of most of the discussions because I have no expertise in those areas. These discussions were led by teachers and by administrators. Just to clarify, this was not anything like the legacy planning. That plan still exists. This was simply, I think, the superintendent trying to reach out to her staff to say, what do you think about some of these things before she brought them to a broader audience? This clearly, she kept stating to us over the course of those 2 weeks that this was an initial discussion. This was not to be perceived as the discussion, but an initial discussion.
Thank you, Deb.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Any other sort of questions about this visioning process that was underway? All right, thank you for that. So we'll continue with public comment. I did see that Lauren Weinstock had her hand raised previously. Maybe you answered that question, Deb. I do see, I do see your hand raised again, Ms. Bergner. Is there anybody else who would like to speak who has not yet spoken? Lauren, you should be ready to go.
Hi, it's Lauren Weinstock. I don't have a lot to add. Deb Kelso did a nice job of clarifying. I've spoken briefly with the superintendent about this. And I just want to say that what I understand she's focusing on, this is not just about facilities. This is about a vision for education from pre-K through 12th grade. And right now we're at a place where we have all these different initiatives, all these different programs, all these different curricula, and she's trying to align them in a way coherent and that makes sense from pre-K all the way through the end of high school. And that her visioning is much broader in that respect. It's not about buildings per se, it's about what is education going to look like in South Kingstown. And of course, the buildings relate to that, but this is a much more holistic and I don't need to clarify what has already been said, but I also appreciate the efforts of the building committee to move the facilities plan forward. And I'll just end there. I just felt like some clarification needed to be made as well.
Thank you, Lauren. And anyone else who would like to speak? All right. Deb, I have moved you back into the meeting. You should be able to speak now.
Thank you. I really do appreciate the second time in. So I appreciate, Deb, that you shared what it was, but I don't recall ever seeing it on any sort of public meeting agenda. So I'm curious how a committee could be formed with only partial members of the school committee even aware of it. Like, there are a lot of transparency concerns about how that came about because it was just really announced 2 weeks ago that it had happened, and no public information was shared with the public that it would even be happening. And now I do understand that some things happen and we don't know about everything, but it seems like something like that would have been spoken about to all of the school committee at a public meeting, and I don't believe I've seen it on any agenda. So that's another issue. Maybe it's there, maybe I did miss it, but I don't think so. But I hear what you're saying about what it was and what it wasn't. Again, none of that was offered on Wednesday when people asked who was on it. And still tonight, Deb, you were there, and you're not offering up the members of the community that were there. It's kind of confusing to me because you didn't admit that you were there until tonight. So is it possible to know who is participating on whatever the visioning committee did for however long, because those meetings weren't open to the public for even public viewing.
All right, I see Rob's hand raised. I think we might want to take a shot at this.
So I'd actually just ask Amy Goins to give us a brief sort of refresher on what constitutes a committee. I mean, this morning we had my bi-weekly staff meeting. Every department head was at the staff meeting. We talked about matters of concern of the municipal government. We talked about John Schock's program. We talked about Terry Murphy's recreation program. We do this every 2 weeks. And that's not a committee, that's just a staff meeting. To the extent that we invite people in, and we have, not often, but if we bring somebody into that meeting, it's not a staff, it doesn't become a committee just because there's an outsider coming to meet with the administrative staff. If the superintendent is bringing 25 of her employees in and has another handful of folks who attend, that doesn't make it a committee if they're not voting, if they're not making decisions, if they're simply providing advice to the superintendent. Amy is better at this than I am, so I'd like her to just share with us, since it is a learning moment, I think.
Sure. This is Amy Goins, Assistant Town Solicitor. The Rhode Island Attorney General does not have bright line standards for what is a public body under the meaning of the Open Meetings Act, but they have identified factors that will help it determine whether a group should be considered a public body for purposes of the OMA. So how was the group established? Was it a formal action? What is the purpose of the group or committee, however it's denoted? Who is it made up of? So there is not an easy answer to the question of is or isn't it a public body. It's something that in every circumstance, the Attorney General looks at on a case-by-case basis and will assess those factors.
Am I muted or unmuted?
We can hear you.
It's just confusing to me why a list of who was at that meeting besides the administrators couldn't be provided to the public, whether it's an open meetings issue or not. You're talking about transparency. You're talking about the community asking. This is now the third public meeting where someone from the community has said, hey, who was at the visioning committee? And no one is able to provide that information. You're still dancing around who actually showed up in the room. You're by people who were at the meeting. Brian is the chair of the school building committee. Deb is on it. It was asked. It's just, I'm still trying to understand why people can't ask who was there and you can't provide the list.
I will allow Rob to try and answer this again.
I'm sorry.
You muted yourself, Rob.
And I didn't take my hand down when I meant to. I'm sorry. I will say, I don't know. I mean, until Linda gets back to me, I don't know what's going on. When you have 25 or 30 people participating in a series of meetings, if she took attendance, it should be an easy question to answer. If she didn't take attendance because it was an internal meeting and the people who were there were supposed to be there and she wasn't really concerned about who was in the room because she had invited them to be there, she may not have an attendees list. So I don't know. Until I speak to Linda about it, I don't know why it's difficult to give out the names. And it's conceivable, I don't know this, but it's conceivable that she's not all that eager to share the names of administrators or teachers who are participating simply because she doesn't understand why the question's being asked. Are folks suspicious of the individual members of the committee? And do I want to, as an employer, expose my employees to?
Could we find out if the members of the school committee were there? Could we find? I mean, it just seems to me, again, it's still like you're hiding who showed up It seems like a no-brainer, black and white question. Hey, who was there? We've asked 3 times now, and no one is willing to provide the information to the rest of the community. Much like people have distrust when the room, you know, only the players in the room know the information. This is a pervasive tactic of elected officials. And this is why people are concerned and distrustful, because a very simple answer is not easily given, even tonight. Could I ask, were there members of the school committee on the visioning committee? Does anyone know who they are?
So,
Deb, I think part of the problem is that there is no visioning committee, as I understand it from the discussion that's taking place. So there's no, you know, posting of a meeting of a committee that doesn't exist. There's probably nobody taking attendance of these visioning. It sounds like just an administrative, you know, sort of information.
No, parents and community, they reached out to parents who attended. They did. That was stated, just not who the parents were. And besides, Deb, could I ask, were there members of the school committee on the visioning committee?
I don't know. If you stop referring it to a committee, I think that would be more accurate. If there were school committee members who were part of this visioning conversations and process, that's a more accurate question. And I don't know the answer to that. Sorry.
Well, somebody at your table does.
So it's Debbie Kelso. I am just simply not at all comfortable speaking for the superintendent of schools. I was asked to be part of this group. I said yes. I am happy I did it. I learned a lot of things. There was a lot of educational pieces that I would have had no way to learn other than sitting in this group for those hours that I did. I think your questions, Deb, belong directed at the superintendent. It's her group, and I don't know anything about agreements she made other than with me on who was going to be there. I didn't take attendance. No one took attendance from me. I am simply not comfortable speaking for the superintendent.
So you can't answer if other elected officials, school committee or town council members were at these meetings where you spent hours?
I guess
you're not willing to.
Other town council members tonight, if they want to say if they were there. I'm willing to say I was there, and that's what I'm willing to take responsibility for my actions, but I'm not.
I appreciate that.
I'm not willing to have my word taken as what transpired. I was a member of this group. I was participant of this group.
Are there other members of the town council that were members of this group that met for hours?
If there's any other council member who would like to answer that question, by all means.
This is Bryant. I was not at the meeting or meetings.
Joe Veely, I was not.
I was not there either, Deb.
Is Rory not here tonight?
He's there.
Deb, I was not in attendance at those conversations during the visioning, and I am
Thank you.
not aware of the makeup of the group, and I am also not aware of any other elected officials who were a part of it as well.
Were there any other school committee members there, Deb?
So
I'm just going to reiterate, I am not going to speak for who was there. To me, your questions need to be directed to the superintendent. I am not a spokesperson for this group. I was merely a participant.
Wow. Okay. So you can't disclose to the public, but you might try to help me get a list of who was there. Maybe, right? Maybe. Wow. I didn't think this was going to be such a difficult question. It was just the third time it was asked of elected officials, and no one is providing any information. She avoided the question when asked directly multiple times at the school building committee.
Rob, I see your
The-
hand.
Mr. President and members of the council, I did just look up on the website for the school department whether this item had occurred on one of their agendas and whether there was any further information. There is in fact an agenda item on May 12th identifying the visioning exercise that the superintendent was engaging in, and there's a fairly detailed description of what was going on, 3 or 4 pages, PDF pages. Anyone interested in what that visioning exercise was all about can find that report at the May 12th meeting of the school committee.
All right, very good. And yeah, thank you for raising this to our attention, Deb. Sorry we couldn't satisfy your curiosity. Christy Fish, I see your hand raised again. You should be, there you go.
I'm sorry. I am calling because I am feeling really bad that Deb has been getting harassed now for the past 15 minutes. And this is all very simple. I don't believe it is meant to be a secret at all, like it's being made out to be. There was, Deb Kelso was there. Stephanie Cantor from the school committee was there. Mostly all of the administration from every school was there, along with 3 teachers that were part of a co-teaching pilot model at Peacedale. It was led by Frank Locker, who is an educational visionary. He also is an architect. It was about best practices in education and innovative models of education. It was not a formal committee. Linda is planning on having several stages of different committees to give their feedback. I was one of the parents that were on the committee, along with 2 other parents. Like Deb said, there were 6 meetings that were 2 hours each. And we watched different videos. It was led by Frank. There was nothing secretive at all about it. I don't know if anybody has any other questions that they'd like to ask now that we've solved the big mystery. And I know that Linda said in last week's meeting, she was going to provide a list, which I believe she will. So why again, this is being made into this big mysterious debacle, I'm very uncertain about, because it really doesn't need to be that way at all. And I don't believe Linda was making it a secret. She said a list was going to be out, and I'm sure Linda typically always follows through on what she says. A list will be out, but now we know who the school committee person was on it. And like I said, there were 3 parents on it. I was one of them. The rest were teachers and administration from pretty much every school is represented except for Curtis Corner. Anybody else have any questions about it?
And Mr. President, this is Rob Zernetsky. Linda just texted me back. She will be posting a list to board docs later. She's at a meeting right now, but intends to post that to board docs.
Very good. Christy, thank you for all the extra information on the folks who were present there. I will hope that that is satisfying for Deb's questions.
And again, it was not a formal committee that was put out to the entire community meant to exclude other people. As Deb said, Linda repeatedly stated during this that we were part of a process that was occurring and other people would be invited during the process. So it was not to take the place of things that have been done before. It was not like the legacy planning meeting where the entire community was involved. I can only share what I know so that not to make it this mystifying thing that happened and just put it out there. I don't think Linda would have a problem with me sharing. So no reason for everybody to continue to be in suspense.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for
you.
taking part in the visioning, and to you as well, Deb. It sounds like it was probably a worthwhile exercise, and hopefully, you know, the schools got something out of it as well as everybody who participated. Are there any other folks who would like to make public comments? All right. Are there any council members who would like to make comment? Okay, well, you know, for myself,
This is
go on,
Brian. I'll make a comment. I just wanted to say that with everything going on in this world, we've been through a lot this year, last year as well, with COVID, and then with the unrest, and then the protest. I'm just happy to see a lot of people in the community coming together and peacefully protesting in our town. Thank you.
That's right. I will echo that. I did take part in a small protest demonstration at Dale Carlia Corner that was organized last week. It was great to see the outpouring of support from community members for Black Lives Matter, you know, the push in the movement against police brutality that we've seen, you know, hundreds of examples of now in dealing with the peaceful protests around the country. I felt it was particularly encouraging that our own police force was there and helped keep it safe, and you know, made sure that folks were able to march safely down the street and stop traffic in the intersection so that their safety was assured. That's the type of policing we count on here in South Kingstown. But clearly it's not the type of policing that exists everywhere in this country. And it's high time that there's a reckoning in our country for equal justice. And I'm curious to see where it goes. I know that there will be demands placed upon our own police force probably, but certainly throughout Rhode Island and throughout the country. You know, I look forward to those discussions. I'm sure, you know, the chief will be amenable to conversations about what specific policies can be done here. And I think it's more than a discussion than just about policing our communities. It's really a discussion about how we realize more justice in our economic system and how we fight racism in a much broader sense. So those are discussions to come. I appreciate, you know, we've started to receive some emails asking for defunding the police. I think that is a term that is loaded and requires a lot more discussion and definition. And again, look forward to those discussions. It's incumbent upon all elected officials that we take this very seriously.
Thank you, Abel. Looks like there's still a hand in the attendees raised.
I believe that is still Ms. Bergner. I'm not sure if, I mean, I think we're done with that discussion about the schools, so I'm satisfied that she's had her opportunity to speak. That being said, if there's no other comments from council members, I'll move on to the manager's report.
Not too many items. We've actually covered some of them in correspondence tonight, but I do want to let the council know that the longstanding attempt to dispose of the Mary Carpenter's property in Matunic has come to a milestone. The request for proposals ended today. At the close of business, the request for proposals were due, and we have received one proposal for the purchase of that property. We will be reviewing that and will be coming to the council in the near future with regard to that proposal. We have received a number of questions on the budget referendum. Two of them I'd like to address because they have been, they've come up several times in emails and phone calls and questions from citizens. The first is whether your ballot, well, the first is the difference between a ballot application and a ballot. Ours is a two-step process. You have to make an application to receive a ballot, then you receive the ballot and you vote the ballot. Then the next question that has come up is when's the last day for me to get a ballot? And I'm going to let Susan correct me if I've got any of this wrong, but the correct answer, I think, is you have to have returned your application by 4 o'clock on July 13th. And if you're coming in that late with your application, you're going to have to file your ballot at the same time, because your ballot is going to have to be received at that time before the election. You can make an application for a ballot anytime between now and July 13th. If you can mail it back and it will arrive in time for the 14th of July, then you can mail back. No? Okay, Susan, correct me. See this?
Well, this is an emergency ballot process that the Board of Canvassers has allowed mail requests for because of the COVID circumstances. Emergency ballots must be voted and or received by 4 p.m. the day before the budget referendum. So the deadline is 4 p.m. on Monday, July 13th. People can actually come to the town hall and vote by emergency ballot at the town hall up until 4 p.m. on July 13th. If they are doing it by mail, we must receive the ballot by 4 p.m. on July 13th. If you feel that it is getting short of time to mail it, we have a locked drop box outside of the town hall where people can put their voted ballots in again by 4 p.m. on Monday, July 13th. The rec center will be used as a polling place all day from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening on Tuesday, July 14th, to hold the all-day budget referendum at which any registered voter in town is welcome to come and vote at that time.
There you go. So we've had a lot of questions on it, but it's July 13th at 4 o'clock. The ballot has to be back.
Correct.
Otherwise, you have to vote in the physical space at the rec center on the 14th.
That's correct.
So that question has come up a lot. The other item that has come up a lot is whether or not the ballots will be postage prepaid or not, and they will be.
Right.
Right.
You got muted.
So Rob, you're muted, but on the postage prepaid, does that mean it's only if it's sent back, we're charged?
Yes, only if you mail it back, we're charged. If you bring it back yourself, then it won't be. Well, actually, Susan, I think that's correct, right? The post office doesn't charge us for unused postmarks.
That is my understanding, yes. But the ballots themselves that we mail out to voters who request them will include a prepaid envelope to return to the Board of Canvassers.
It's Deb Kelso. Susan, when do you anticipate to begin the mailing of the ballots to folks who have requested?
I am hoping that by the end of this week, I actually receive the ballots back from the Board of Elections printing company.
Okay, I'm just looking to see what we can tell the public when to expect to see them in their mailboxes.
Yeah.
So Susan was reporting earlier today that we've received about 80 applications thus far.
Correct.
Water Street emails and correspondence, we're still getting a large number of letters and correspondence on Water Street, the issue of public access on Water Street, which is a private right-of-way. We did have a request today that came in, and you'll see it at the next meeting, but I might as well just share with you and the public what we know at this point, asking that the town ask the CRMC to begin the process of determining whether they have any record of Water Street being a public right-of-way. We actually made that request back in October of last year. We've not yet heard from CRMC. I'll follow up and ask them if they've been able to do any of that research. They are very busy, and there's been some change in leadership over there, but that request was made back in October of last year. I will also note on all of that, the existence of a public right-of-way doesn't mean that it's a right-of-way that we have the right, we the town have the right to enforce. Just because the public has access through an easement doesn't mean that we enforce the easement. It's an important point. And then finally, I'd like to just comment and commend the police department on their professionalism and the effort that was put into working with the protesters last week. And to be honest with you, working with protesters who are planning peaceful demonstrations here in town in the future. They've been very proactive. They've worked with students. They've worked with the people who want to make sure that it is known that they don't agree with the policies that have resulted in unwarranted and unacceptable treatment of a large segment of our population. The police department has been wonderful about sitting down with people and making sure that they know that we're all on the same side with regard to wanting to make sure that justice means justice for everybody, that we are not, we're not supporting violence, we're not supporting ill treatment of anyone in this community. And I've been very impressed working very closely with the police leadership in their open-mindedness, in their rational approach to policing, and in their very careful planning to make sure that everyone's right to demonstrate, right to protest is well respected. So I just want to thank the chief and his entire leadership staff for just being true professionals, just wonderful.
Thank you, Rob. All right, so that brings us to the end of the manager's report. Next is appointments. I don't believe there's any appointments to be made tonight. Perhaps if we could give some direction to Susan about who we would like to interview in terms of a priority. I know that there's an open position on the planning board, so we should probably interview the folks who have applied for that spot as soon as possible. Is there anybody else? Well, let's start there, Susan. And hopefully we can get them in for the next meeting. Additionally, if somebody does put in an application between now and that meeting and they're available to come to that meeting, if they could just be added to that list as well. Let's try to make this appointment as soon as possible. I see that we may have lost Susan. Anyway, I'm sure the message got through. All right. That brings us to new business. 12A is a resolution requesting the legislators of the town of South Kingstown to introduce enabling legislation in the 2020 session of the General Assembly to place a municipal bond authorization referendum question on the November 2020 ballot for the following. An act authorizing the town of South Kingstown to finance the town capital improvement plan for the fiscal years 2020 through 2026 for various municipal projects by the issuance of not more than $6,500,000 in bonds, notes, and or other evidences of indebtedness therefore. Said question to be placed before the voters at the general election to be conducted on November 3rd, 2020. We did discuss this item a bit at the last meeting. Brian sort of started the conversation. I don't know if you wanted to begin the conversation tonight or if there was other people we wanted to hear from.
Yeah, sure. Excuse me, I'll begin the conversation. This is Bryant, but I think we should also bring in some folks from the attendees list. Lance, I think I saw Craig in there as well, and also the chief of police. when I brought this up at our last meeting or through the email that I had sent, it had to do with the 6.5, I think, million that we were looking to bond for some important projects in town. And we were also at that time contemplating what to do with the school bond, whether or not to bond with that. But at the time, there wasn't enough information available. That being said, there are significant things in our town that I think need to get addressed. One is the ability for our first responders to communicate as much as possible and with as much ease as possible throughout our town. And currently, with the current radio system, there are definitely places where they cannot communicate either in buildings. The other plus to the radio project is it'll allow first responders to be able to communicate with the school system and in the school buildings. And currently they cannot do that in most cases, unless they're using one of the police would be using a borrowed radio from what is it, 400 megahertz system, Lance? I'm sorry. And then the other thing that I thought was important, and again, we're in a weird situation, weird time, COVID. We found out today that the recession started back in February. But at the same time, there are important things to our infrastructure that we need to address, like the radio project, but also things like our roads. John Schock has talked many times in the past about the fact that how many years it's going to take us to pave our roads. And we want to make sure that people are driving on as safe roads as possible. And the last item that I brought up, and again, there are definitely other items as well. The last major item was the continuation of the seawall. Now, granted, we're still looking for funding from other sources, but I think we're just one hurricane away from a problem on Matunic Beach Road. And that would cut off a significant amount of our population and the ability for first responders to respond to that area if something were to happen with that road. And I think someone had their hand up in the panelist. Let me just.
Yeah, Rob, you wanted to.
Yeah, I would just suggest we bring Zach Saul into the meeting as well.
Sorry about that. I missed Zach. I didn't see him. So that was pretty much in a nutshell. But I do think that, the radio project is something that we've been working on for a very long time. It's been something that's been needed for a very long time in our town. And if Lance, if you could just remind the council and the general public as to why that's important.
Yeah, so we've actually, during the protest, there was a few dead spots where the police couldn't talk to the command post we had set up last week. It's very important that EMS, police, and fire have clear communications out to dispatch, command center. And, if you're in a burning building or the EMS people are over a person trying to render medical aid and they have to leave that patient to get outside to have clear communications, that's just unacceptable. And that's what's happening today. So it's something it's just needed. It's been a long time coming.
Thank you, Lance. Rob, your hand is raised again. Is that new or is that old?
Sorry, that's unintended.
So, Rob and Zach, perhaps this is a question for you. I think, when we were discussing this, I don't know how many meetings ago, originally, your recommendation was not to seek this authorization for either the municipal or the school side. How have your feelings changed at all? And if not, why not?
Our recommendation was based largely on an assessment of where we were in the COVID response. We're in very uncertain times. It was clear during the public discussion of the budget that there's an awful lot of anxiety about public spending right now. The community, many members of the community expressed grave concerns that we were not reducing spending. And it just seemed that the appetite for public indebtedness and increased spending was not there at the time. I don't know that public sentiment has changed. I do think that we run the risk, you always run the risk when you put a question out to referendum, run the risk of not having the referendum succeed. We had essentially decided that we weren't going to ask the question, that we were going to look for alternative means of financing these projects. I think that we could pursue a dual path, alternative financing, and at the same time ask the question. It's not perfectly clear that the state legislature is going to be able to act on this legislation. They've expressed an interest in doing so. Back in March, it was even more uncertain. I think that there is not a clear schedule yet, but there is a clear intention on the part of the state legislature to take up municipal bond questions as soon as the opportunity arises. So that is a little bit different than it was a couple of months ago. But I am still concerned that we are in an environment where the public is not comfortable. They're not comfortable about private firm financial prospects, and they're not comfortable about public operations and public finance going forward. It's a lot to ask people to spend money, even on things that we know are critically important, when they are worried about making their own mortgage or making sure that their businesses stay afloat. That having been said, we're not asking for $6.5 million out of the taxpayer's pocket today. We're asking for the debt service for the next couple of years, which really is the time frame, the horizon on which we have to consider the impact on the taxpayer. So I don't know that there's a very good answer. What I do think is that the budget referendum that we're currently working toward is evidence that there is very grave concern among members of the public that we are spending money that they're not comfortable with us spending. Now, we will know when we know the result of that referendum, whether that's a majority view or a large minority or a small minority view. But it is evidence that there's discomfort in the community. I do worry about continuing to talk about increased public spending even before the budget referendum has been resolved. But you know, this is a perfectly appropriate conversation for us to have, because it is clearly the case that without improvements to the radio network, without improvements to the public safety communications network, we're in greater danger than if we improve the network. It is clearly the case that if we do not secure, shore up the seawall, Matunic Beach Road is in jeopardy. It is clearly the case that if we do not make improvements to the roads, they're going to become more dangerous. Those are all absolutely true assertions. And again, I don't know that our view of this has changed, but if it is the will of the council to go to the voters and ask this question, we'll do everything we can to pursue a two-path approach. And if the voters decide that this is something that they want to support, then we will do everything we can to execute the bids or the bonds and the bids associated with those bonds to get these projects done as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Rob. Joe, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Abel. Joe Veely. So when we first discussed this and the other bond referendum, we were concerned about what our tax collection rate was going to be, for instance, come this fall with COVID. So as always, my preference would be to, if we were going to bond, say $6.5 million, we figure out what that annual expense is and we find the savings somewhere else in the budget, so that it's not, frankly, new spending, it's different spending. There are some savings here by bonding if by escalating or spending, doing these projects sooner. We know that the road construction projects have an escalation of costs. You know, 5 years later, it costs more money, and you can frankly pave more roads if you do them sooner. So bonding is a way to do that. So the roads, the public safety, the radio program, those things are very important, I think, and probably belong, further up the list. Things like the seawall in Matunic, I think perhaps I know it's another pocket in the same pair of pants, but perhaps there's some federal money, some federal grant money that's going to come out of the stimulus effort coming out of Washington that maybe we could fund that with. And then when you go down to the building at Old Mountain Field and the boat ramp, I mean, those things we have sort of budgeted. Let's put this much a year away until we can afford them. And I would prefer to do that. So having said that, I understand that we could put a bond on for $6.5 million, and then us or a future council could choose whether or not to issue the bonds and spend it. And the one comment I'll make about going to the public, if the public votes no, there's your answer, right? So if you put this on a November ballot and the public says, when you discussed this back in June, you had concerns about COVID, you had concerns about tax collections, but they'll have the luxury of knowing how the tax collections are going by September, October, and make the decision. They may be going well, and they say, okay, well, we can see, taking care of the radio system and taking care of the roads and whatever else the public feels is important. Or they may see that tax collections are not going well, and they may say no. So, I mean, ultimately, that's your answer. So, we're dealing with this without knowing the real impact by the time the public's going to vote on this, right? So we're going to deal with this tonight and make some sort of a decision tonight to go forward or not, without knowing what's going to happen in the fall. They'll have that, and I trust that the voters will take that information and do what works best based on that. So while bonding is the way to make it affordable, and again, my preference would be to say, the bond is 20 years and it's going to cost us, $300,000 a year for 20 years or whatever that number is. Let's figure out how to move that budget around so it's not really new spending. But those are my comments, and I could see my way clear to put this on the ballot, but understand that I have concerns about what the effect of COVID is going to be on our finances. I think that if we do put this on the ballot, we will, and the public will have much more information by November and make a more informed decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Bryant, your hand is up.
Sure. The only other thing I wanted to add to Rob's comment is that, from my understanding, I believe that hopefully when the legislator comes back in session, they're going to be looking at these as a group of them from the cities and towns and voting on them that way. I see Joe's points as well about the concerns. My concern is that, like, for instance, if we don't do something about the seawall in Matunic and something does happen, how much is that going to cost the town at that point? So I just want to make sure, of course, I want to make sure we're spending our money wisely. And I like the path of looking at the bond potentially, but also having a secondary option as well that Rob mentioned, in going at it at the same time so that we don't waste any more time. And the other thing that we have to remember about the radio project is that we're not paying for the whole thing. We'd be sharing the cost with the UFD. And is there anyone else we're sharing the cost with? I can't remember.
Yes, Kingston is also going to be contributing.
That's correct. Okay.
All right, Deb, your hand's up.
So just for clarification, this vote that we take tonight is simply to ask the legislators for the permission to put it on, correct? It will come back before us again to put it on the ballot, or is this one?
Deb, it's to have the ability to put it on the ballot if we choose to in the future. Without the enabling legislation, we don't have the ability to do it if we choose.
Correct. But the vote tonight is simply to ask for the enabling legislation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I would actually ask Susan for her institutional knowledge on this one. Historically, how has that been done in South Kingstown?
We have to request the General Assembly to pass the enabling legislation. Once that is accomplished, the council would then have to vote to request the Secretary of State to place that bond referendum question on the ballot for the election in November.
So it's a two-step process. Tonight is to ask the
Yes.
General Assembly, then the question comes back to us again to ask the Secretary of State to put it on the ballot.
That's correct.
And when, Susan, would we need to ask the Secretary of State that question?
It's July or August. I don't have the dates in front of me.
Thank you. Rory, your hand's up.
Just to clarify a few questions, maybe Amy Goins can kind of chip in here and help out. Just to clarify kind of what Deb said. So if we do vote tonight, get the majority to seek the enabling legislation, and let's say, in fact, we do get the enabling legislation, legislators meet, this goes to the municipal house committee, it passes there, it goes to the floor, and that passes. At a subsequent town council meeting, we would decide to send this to the Secretary of State to have this on the ballot in November.
Correct. This is Amy Goins, Assistant Town Solicitor.
Okay.
Yes, that's the way the process would work.
At that subsequent meeting, could we decide that we don't want it in November, but would rather have it at a later date? Could we do that? Because the third sentence in this, or third paragraph in this new business item says said question to be placed before the voters at the general election to be conducted on November 3, 2020.
Yeah, so the answer is you would need new enabling legislation because the enabling legislation that you'd be seeking would specifically be referencing the November 2020 election.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. President, this is Rob Zarnetsky. Amy, a question about that then would be, do we need to identify the election at which the legislature entertain a generic request?
I think it would be up to them ultimately, but based on my experience, their enabling legislation such as this specifically requests a specific election. It wouldn't be a blanket authority to, put it on whatever election, put it on whatever ballot in whatever year the municipality deems appropriate. It generally is granted in the year that it's placed on the ballot.
So in other words, if we pursue and move forward with this and we do get enabling legislation, it's either November election or not at all.
Correct. You would need to seek new enabling legislation, in my opinion. Again, that would ultimately be up to them. We could revise it to eliminate the reference to the November 2020 election, but I'm not sure they would consider that legally valid because they're granting specific permission. So generally it's tied to a specific election.
This is Rob Zarnetsky again. Amy, have you ever seen a or subsequent special election on or before December 31st kind of thing? November 3rd or a special election to be held on or before April 15, 2021?
I haven't, perhaps this year they would entertain something like that, given all the uncertainty. I have not seen something like that in the past.
Thank you, Amy. This is Abel. Deb, I see your hand up now.
So we had spoken in the past about the possibilities of breaking up the bond, the questions into 3 or 4 separate questions. Is there a reason we chose to go with the 6.5 and not ask the radio question and the road question?
So this is Rob Zarnetsky. This is a very generic piece of legislation. In fact, the radio project isn't even specifically called out in the legislation. It would allow $6.5 million to be bonded for any project approved by the town council as part of the capital plan. So it's the broadest authority one could seek. You could narrow that authority through the capital improvement plan. You could narrow that authority by the way you ask the question of the voters in November. You could pose 3 different questions within the authority for the $6.5 million. This is just starting with the broadest authority. You can always narrow. It's harder to go from a narrow authority to a broader authority in the future.
But the possibility exists that we could, if the General Assembly says, yes, go ahead, then when we pose the question to the Secretary of State, we would identify the projects. Is that, but they would still be $6.5 million worth of projects, one vote on that. Is that what we're still saying?
I actually think you could go with a question that is for less than $6.5 million. Your authority would be up to $6.5 million for a broad range of projects. You could, I believe, pose a question on the ballot that identifies specific projects totaling up to or less than $6.5 million.
Could we pose 3 or 4 questions on the ballot?
Amy, thoughts on that?
We could, this is Amy, we could do, whatever the General Assembly authorizes us to do. And I've been reviewing enabling legislation passed in 2018. And to answer your question, Rob, we should be able, with the assistance of bond counsel, to request that the enabling legislation allow us to hold, submit the question to the electors at the general election or at a general or special election to be held on a date as shall be designated by the council. So there is precedent for allowing that flexibility.
Thank you.
Rob, the only other benefit, right, to putting it all together is the appetite for the bond on the market, correct? Like, meaning if you're going to go out and you're going to just put out $1 million bond or $2 million bond, you may or may not get, the best possible rate. But the higher you go, usually there are going to be more people looking to potentially invest.
Yeah, I'll let Zach chime in here, but yes, generally speaking, there's a sweet spot. If your bond your offer is too small, nobody's interested because it's too small. If it's too big, then you run the risk of sort of impacting your credit rating and that kind of thing. We're nowhere near too big at 6.5 million, nowhere near too big at $6.5 million. Order of magnitude, not too big. I mean, we're just nowhere near it. We could be on the small side at $6.5 million. And if we go less, we're starting to get to be pretty insignificant. And Zach's had recent experience with a small $4 million bond offering that we did for the schools. And Zach, our experience there was what?
So there was, let me answer that in 2 parts. So yes, the deal size at the time when we went out to market, we believe had a effect. We still got a very attractive rate at a little over 2.5%. But to answer Councilman DeCruz's question, I'd take that in 2 parts. I wouldn't confuse the offering when you actually go out to do the bonds with the questions on the ballot. So I think it's that, and Amy can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can ask several questions on the ballot, but you could still go out and do one bond offering. So I wouldn't confuse the 2. So 3 separate questions. It depends on how the questions are worded. And I think at that time you would list what the projects were, give as much detail as you can so that the voters have an understanding of what they're actually voting on. And then we could go out and bond the projects, and we could do it as one bond if that is, what the will of the council will be. I would suggest not to do multiple offerings because there is, regardless of the size of the bond, there are flat issuance costs that will be, incurred. And on a bond size of in that range, you're probably looking at a flat cost somewhere in the $50,000 mark, whether you do, $6 million or, or higher. So if we did multiple bonds, you'd have to pay that $50,000 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times. So I think you want to avoid that. You try to get it all into one offering, as opposed to trying to do multiple offerings, just to avoid the economies of scale. And because of the size of the deal, they're just our flat cost, whether it's the fiscal advisors, the legal, bond counsel, trustees, those are just flat costs because that work is regardless of the size, the same amount of hours have to go into it.
I agree with that. This is Amy, Assistant Town Solicitor. And keep in mind also that even if we have permission from the General Assembly, permission from the voters, ultimately it's the council's decision whether or not to actually move forward. And for an example of that, although I hate to refer to this as an example, but just as an example of when a community decides it, you know, does not want to move forward with a project that's been authorized by the voters, that would be Narragansett with regard to their library.
That's right. And having the authority doesn't mean that you have to do the projects immediately either. The $4 million that was just issued this past month was approved by the voters in 2014. Projects, you know, the authority to go ahead and bond for a project is important, but it doesn't mean that you have to rush the project either.
Zach, I see your hand up.
Rob, Zach Saul, Finance Director. Rob did just take what I was going to raise, but I would say that it's that timing of the necessity to do the project and working on the fiscal side with our fiscal advisor and bond counsel, the timing of the markets, so that you try to hit them at the same time where you're meeting the needs of fulfilling the project and the will of the people, and at the same time trying to obtain the best rate we can. You know, sometimes you don't want to wait too long because if the project has to be done, you may sacrifice getting a better rate. But again, today, the markets are you've seen huge rallies in the last week. There will probably be some correction. You know, things are just unstable, so I don't want to predict what the markets will look like a year from now. But by the time, if this was in November, the timing of when you'd probably actually have to take on the debt service would be sometime in fiscal 2022. So this would be something that you would want to address when, to Councilman Veely's point, when you're preparing the 2022 budget, if it's taking on additional spending or if it is including this in the spending and trying to achieve cost savings somewhere else so that it's almost budget neutral. But that would be at the discretion of, you know, the manager and the council, and we'd go through all the exercises that are necessary, and we would do whatever you would choose in terms of how we would finance this, whether it's, you know, there are several scenarios we could run to make it work for whatever you'd like.
All right, thank you, Zach. Any other questions from council members about this? Rob, your hand is raised.
Just one note that I'd make for the council, and that is the practical implications of a vote to seek this authority from the state legislature. We've been sitting on a request for proposals for the radio improvement program. We've not pushed that out because we do not have an identified funding source. We can go to market with the notation that the bids are accepted subject to the availability of funds. And we're somewhat loath to do that if we're not really even sure we're close to having a funding source. So we've not sent the request for proposals out. That is the only project that's sort of impacted by tonight's vote. The Matunic Beach seawall project is shovel ready. All of the approvals are ready. The proposal is ready to go to any agency that says that it's got grant money available. We are putting that project in front of anybody who might be able to give us funding. There's nothing about tonight's vote that will change our posture with regard to the seawall, at least not immediately. There's nothing about the recreation facility projects that would change. However, a positive vote tonight or a vote in favor of asking the legislature for the authority to move forward would give us enough confidence to go to the market and say, we're asking for proposals subject to the availability of funds and describing this vote and the actions that need to be taken going forward. So we would say, subject to the availability of funds, the town council has requested authority to put this item on a ballot in November from the state legislature. The legislature has not yet approved that request, and the voters will vote in November. We'll lay that out for the folks who would be submitting proposals. It's still not the strongest way for us to be going to the market because we don't have the money in hand, but it would give us enough to at least let folks know that they stand some chance of being paid if they put the time and effort into putting a lot of work into this kind of proposal. When you're doing a $2 million radio project, it takes time, a lot of staff time and a lot of effort. So folks want to know that if they win, they're going to be paid.
All right, thank you. I think that's good information, Rob. I don't have strong feelings on this one way or the other, I suppose, but I'm happy to move this along because I think there's other sort of bottleneck points where we get to make a decision. One question I have is that, and maybe this is for Bryant and Deb in terms of the school facility planning I believe the intent is still to move forward with some type of proposal in the near term because there's a good chance that the legislature may not renew another pot of funding for school facilities after this one runs out of funding.
So Abel, I can answer that question for you. The school building committee has still been moving, full steam ahead, going through the process. So I do anticipate a potential special election in 2021 regarding that. And hopefully very shortly, we are I'd say we're in the 8th inning, trying to get the game completed in terms of all the submittals, and we'll get an answer from RIDE shortly thereafter. And at that point, we can go to bond for that project, and we'll have a better understanding of how much money we're looking to spend and exactly what the project's going to look like, in a better form in terms of real dollars.
Right, yeah, because my thought here is that, if we're going to have a special election for bonding, we can also piggyback this bond question at the same time that we do that one. Not that that's any great benefit or anything, but I guess we have multiple options in front of us.
I have nothing else to say, but if we're ready, I'd like to make a particular motion to
make a comment before you make a motion, Brian.
Yeah, Barry, I lost you. There you go.
So my stance would be I would support requesting enabling legislation with not a date determined. So if we can do that, if the solicitor recommends that we can do that, I would like to do that. That would allow us at a subsequent meeting, as more time goes by, to determine should we do it in the general election or should we wait for a special election to combine it with the school facilities bond. That's what my preference would be.
Thanks, Rory. I think Rob might have a suggestion about sort of the language that we use with this motion.
My suggestion would simply be that you make it clear that the motion is not for the specific language produced by Karen Grandy, the bond counsel, but that we propose appropriate language to the state legislature. If the council's motion tonight, resolution tonight, is to have the town manager work with bond counsel and the town solicitor to prepare legislation to be approved by or submitted to the state legislature, I think that'll be broad enough, and we'll work from the language that you've got tonight, but we'll take care of things like no date and like not identifying specific projects that are high priority projects, such as the radio project.
Yeah, so Rob, that was kind of the from our discussion during our work session. I was going to add that to my motion, if I make a motion, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Do I see any further discussion? All right, do I hear that motion, Brian?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to approve the item to move forward to hopefully obtain enabling legislation, but to also give the manager authority to work with the bond counsel to give the language another look over and making sure that we're presenting it in the best possible light.
Do I hear a second?
Second, Joe Veely.
We have a motion by Brian, second by Joe. Any further discussion? Let's take the.
Kelso, so I just have one question on Bryant's motion. I heard no mention of striking the date from this. That's before us.
From what I
Amy,
heard,
yeah.
that is going to be part of the town manager's decision-making process with bond counsel. But if you want to ask Bryant to revise his motion so it includes.
I just like a few words that say, and amending or striking the November 3rd date from what's before us.
I think that the thing is, though, from Amy's comment, that you might not strike the date, you just might add to it. You might say on November 3rd or thereafter. So
that's fine, as long as we're not, because of what's written here before us. I just don't want to be tied to November 3rd. I just want to make it clear that we're not tied to November 3rd.
Yeah, but Deb, we're discussing it, I guess, so I don't see us being tied to November 3rd. I think we give the town manager the ability with the bond counsel to make some of those decisions. And then when it comes back to us at that point, we're going to decide at that point. Just because we have the enabling legislation doesn't mean we're going to put it on the ballot. We have the option to put it on the ballot at that point.
Right. I just want, Brian, what I'm trying to do here is make sure we're asking the General Assembly the correct question.
Okay.
all right. So, Deb, are you satisfied with the motion as it exists? It'd be.
No, I'm not. Amy, please tell me what you think.
I think if you want to be absolutely clear, you can ask Brian to amend the motion to include the language that the town manager articulated, which is you're simply endorsing the idea of enabling legislation as discussed, with direction to the manager to work with the bond counsel and the solicitor regarding the election date at which this would be presented to the voters.
I'll amend my motion to add what Amy just said.
I'll second Joe Veal.
All right. Motion from Brian, second from Joe. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll for this one?
Council President Collins,
Aye.
Council Vice President DeCruz,
Aye.
Councilwoman Kelso,
Aye.
Councilman McEntee,
Aye.
Councilman Veely.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous.
Thank you all. And that brings us to 12C, which is a resolution authorizing the town clerk to advertise for order of notice of public hearing relative to proposed amendments to the town code. This is Chapter 10, Motor Vehicles and Traffic, Article 1 in general. This is for a series of stop signs. Do I hear a motion on this one?
Joe Veely, I'll make a motion to approve 12C as presented.
Rory McEntee, second.
Motion from Joe, second from Rory. Is there any discussion? Any opposed? And that motion carries. 12E is a resolution authorizing a septage discharge rate of $86 per 1,000 gallons effective July 1st, 2020. Amending the town's schedule of fees as further described in a memorandum from the Public Services Director to the town manager dated May 28th.
Abel Jovili, I'll make a motion to approve agenda items. I'd like to lump in 12E and F. I think they sort of go together.
This is Bryant. I'll second that.
We have a motion from Joe, second from Bryant, in favor of 12E and F. Is there any discussion on these? Anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. And that brings us to 12G, a resolution authorizing awards of bid for miscellaneous road building materials to the following bidders at the unit prices bid, and to further extend for an additional year upon mutual agreement with the vendor, and is further described in a memo from the Public Services Director of the Town Manager dated May 29th, entitled Bid Recommendation, Road Building Materials. I will not go through the effort of reading all that gobbledygook. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve item 12G.
Jovili, second.
A motion by Deb, second by Joe. Any discussion on this item? We discussed it a little bit in the work session. We're hoping to get some pretty good rates on the oil related products. So hopefully that'll bring down the cost of the road surfacing program. Anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. 12H, a resolution authorizing an award of bid to Atlantic Control Systems of Exeter for the boiler flue project in an amount not to exceed $22,900, including a $3,000 contingency with funding from the Wastewater Enterprise Fund unassigned net assets. And as further described in a memo from the Public Services Director to the Town Manager dated May 29th.
This is Bryant. I'll make a motion to accept item 12 or approve item 12H.
It's Deb Kelso, second.
Motion by Bryant, second by Deb. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. 12I, a resolution authorizing the waiver of all local permit fees associated with Silver Lake Pump Station and Kingston Pump Station improvements to be constructed by Hart Engineering Corporation, Cumberland, as further described in a memo from the Public Services Director to the Town Manager dated May 20th.
I'll make a motion to, this is Bryant. I'll make a motion to approve item 12I.
Deb Kelso, second.
Good, motion by Bryant, second by Deb. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries as well. 12J is a resolution amending an award of contract originally authorized on April 13th to R.E. Erickson of Providence or maybe from Walpole, Massachusetts, for Water Division SCADA improvements from an amount not to exceed $15,666 to an amount not to exceed $25,126, including a $5,000 contingency to be funded from the Water Enterprise Fund unassigned net assets, further described in a memo from the Public Services Director to the Town Manager dated June 2nd. I hear a motion.
Motion to approve item 12J.
Bryant, second.
Motion by Deb, second by Bryant. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed? That motion carries as well. 12L, a resolution authorizing an award of bid to Kingston Cleaners of 50 High Street, Wakefield for dry cleaning and laundry services at the unit prices bid for the period July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, with the option to extend one additional year through June 30th, 2022, inclusive, if mutually agreeable to both parties. Further described in a memo from the police chief to the town manager dated.
This is Bryant. I'll make a motion to approve 12L, is it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Deb Kelso, second.
Motion from Bryant, second from Deb. Any further discussion? This one, just note that Kingston Cleaners, Pier Cleaners, however the name works, was a little bit higher in the bid, but Chief said, and I think this is based on experience, that he feels more comfortable that Kingston Cleaners will be there in all circumstances. The previous contractor was not able to meet the needs of the department a couple months ago. So that is the reason for going with the higher bidder. All right. Is there anyone opposed? And that motion carries. 12M is a resolution authorizing an award of bid to Automatic Temperature Controls Incorporated of Cranston, Rhode Island for a 3-year contract for HVAC service and maintenance for all municipal buildings commencing on July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023 with the following price schedule. You can find it on your agenda and further described in a memo from the facility superintendent to the town manager dated June 3rd, 2020.
This is Deb Kelso, motion to approve item 12M.
This is Bryant. I'll second that.
Motion from Deb, second by Bryant. Any discussion on this one? My question basically is, this is for municipal services. I imagine the schools probably have HVAC needs as well. Is this something where we're combining our efforts with them?
Actually is, let's see, Colleen, is Mark Russo in the audience? We got Mark to call him in because I know that he's in constant contact with the school department. I don't know what the state of their HVAC coordinated contracting is. This does not cover the schools. However, I know that there is an ongoing effort to look to coordinate those services. This won't do that. This contract doesn't achieve a sole contract for both the schools and the municipal side departments, but I know they're trying to figure out how to do HVAC and lighting in a coordinated way. But Mark's not here yet.
He's not here, no.
No, he's not.
That's the answer that I was asking for. So thank you for that. Obviously, in the future, you know, if we can get economies of scale on this type of stuff, that's the best. All right. Do I see anyone opposed to did I get a motion? Yes, I did. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? All right. That motion carries. 12N is a resolution authorizing an award of bid to Otis Elevator Company of Smithfield for elevator inspections, maintenance, and repairs for all municipal elevators for a period of 3 years, commencing on July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023, in an amount not to exceed $7,200 for each of the 3 years of service. Further, and to further extend upon recommendation from the facility superintendent for an additional 2 years in an amount not to exceed $7,540 per year, July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2025, and further described in a memo from the facility superintendent to the town manager dated June 3rd. Who would like to make the motion on this one?
I've got a motion to approve item 12N.
Bryant, second.
Motion by Deb, second by Bryant. Any discussion?
This would also fall under your notes from the last item, Abel, about combining economies, right?
Agreed.
And the motion is the same.
Very good. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, is anyone opposed? Very good, that motion carries. Item O is a resolution extending the town's declaration of emergency adopted at an emergency session on March 15th, 2020, and subsequently renewed on April 13th and May 11th, as shown on Exhibit 2 attached to the agenda. We had somewhat lengthy discussion on this item in the work session, but Rob, if you wanted to just give a brief sort of update on, why we're continuing to pass these extensions.
Sure. And I'd ask Amy Goins if she wouldn't mind to jump in here as well. It feels a little weird to be looking for this authority from the council because it's me who's going to be exercising it. Amy's sort of a third party, more honest broker about this on some level. Really what we're trying to do is to remain consistent with the emergency declaration status of the state of Rhode Island so that we're in a position where we can mirror the executive orders and fill any gaps in executive orders at the local level. We want to mirror the orders that are coming from the governor. And if the governor has got an item that is not a statewide issue, we'd like to be able to step in with a local emergency order that meets the needs of South Kingstown. So we've got that situation. There is no state order, but there's a number of municipalities that have temporarily suspended enforcement of their plastic bag bans. There's been a lot of hardship on small businesses. One of the hardships that small businesses have had is that it's difficult, has been difficult, it's getting better actually, to get paper bags because supply chains have been disrupted. So there are a number of communities, including South Kingstown, that have stepped up and issued a local executive order, even though there is no statewide executive order that covers it. Likewise, wherever there is an executive order that addresses the number of people who can gather at restaurants or what have you, we institute a local order so that we can enforce it on our own rather than having to coordinate with the Department of Health or the Department of Business and Business Regulation or what have you. If there's a local order and we see a violation, we can simply go in and say, look, we can't speak for the state on this, but you're also violating the local executive order, so you have to knock it off. Amy, other than that, sort of, what's the framework that we're working with that I may have missed?
This is Amy, Assistant Town Solicitor. I don't have anything to add to that. It would be my recommendation that we follow the state and other municipalities that have also extended their local emergency declarations, right? The purpose of the declaration of emergency is to give the manager the flexibility to issue orders quickly. Since we're in a state of emergency, things can change. It seems like we're on a good trajectory, but as Rob indicated, who knows what will happen in the fall, the winter. We'll have to see what Governor Raimondo will do regarding keeping the state of emergency alive as we get into phase 3 in July and beyond that. But it's my recommendation that we do follow the state and extend our state of emergency accordingly.
Thank you, Rob and Amy. Do I hear a motion on 12-0?
Rory McAtee, I'll make a motion to approve 12-0.
Debbie Kelso, second.
Motion by Rory, second by Deb. Any discussion on this one?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss it really quickly. I think it's an important thing to extend it. I think we're getting to the point, though, where it's important that we have it, but hopefully we can still communicate before major decisions are made by the town manager, unofficially, potentially. But also, I like the idea of what we did today. I think it's something I brought up a while ago, where any decisions that are made need to be ratified afterwards by the council.
Good. Thank you, Brian. Any further discussion? All right. We have a motion. We have a second. I think for this one, we'll take the roll call.
Council President Collins,
Aye.
Council Vice President DeCruz,
Aye.
Councilwoman Kelso,
Aye.
Councilman McEntee,
Aye.
Councilman Veely,
In the spirit of consistency, no.
the motion passes 4-1.
All right, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of tonight's agenda. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Deb Kelso, motion to adjourn.
Second, Bryant.
Motion by Deb, second by Bryant. Any discussion? All right, in that case, anyone opposed?
No.
Meeting is over.
Good
Thank
night.
you all for partaking.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.